Hello friends, welcome to my channel Cryptic Wisdom. Friends, let's start today's story. Once in a quiet mountain village, there lived a philosopher renowned far and wide for his knowledge. His life was dedicated to the pursuit of wisdom, and his library was filled with ancient scrolls and books on philosophy, Zen, and every field of study imaginable. The shelves in his study stretched from floor to ceiling, lined with the accumulated knowledge of generations. To anyone who visited him, it was clear that he had spent his life in devotion to learning. He had debated with scholars, written treatises, and was well respected by everyone who knew him. Yet, despite all his intellectual achievements, the philosopher found himself restless, as if something essential eluded him. He felt a gnawing emptiness inside, a sense that all his knowledge had not brought him the peace and understanding he longed for. One day, while walking through the village, he heard rumors of a Zen master who had recently come to the nearby monastery. It was said that this master had achieved enlightenment and lived in a state of pure contentment, far beyond the grasp of worldly knowledge. Intrigued, the philosopher decided to visit the monastery and meet this master, hoping that perhaps he could provide the missing piece to his intellectual puzzle. The next morning, the philosopher climbed the steep path that led to the monastery, carrying with him a sense of anticipation and a collection of questions he had accumulated over the years. Upon arriving, he was greeted by the master, a serene and humble figure, dressed in simple robes. After exchanging pleasantries, the philosopher quickly began to share his intellectual journey, his vast knowledge of Zen teachings, and the countless books he had read. The master listened quietly, nodding occasionally, but said little. When the philosopher had finished speaking, the master looked into his eyes and said, "You speak well, but tell me, what have you truly learned?" The philosopher was taken aback by the question. "I have studied the ancient texts, debated with the wisest of scholars, and spent my life in pursuit of knowledge," he replied confidently. The Zen master smiled. "But have you found peace? Has your learning brought you the wisdom you seek?" The philosopher was silent, for the truth was that he had not. All his studies had left him with more questions than answers. The more he learned, the further enlightenment seemed to drift from his grasp. Sensing the philosopher's inner turmoil, the master stood and led him outside to the monastery garden, where a small river flowed peacefully. "Sit here," said the master, "and watch the river for 3 days. Do not speak, do not read, just observe. When the time has passed, come back to me." Though puzzled, the philosopher agreed. He sat by the riverbank, watching the water flow past, the ripples gently dancing across the surface. At first, his mind raced with thoughts. He tried to make sense of the master's instruction. What could be learned from simply watching a river? As the hours passed, his thoughts gradually slowed. He began to notice the subtleties of the river, the way it flowed effortlessly around rocks, the way each ripple was unique, yet the river itself remained unchanged. There was a timeless quality to the water's movement, an unspoken lesson in its simplicity. It neither hurried nor delayed, flowing naturally with the contours of the land. For 3 days, the philosopher sat by the river, silently observing. By the end of the 3rd day, something within him shifted. He realized that all his years of study had been like trying to contain the river in a jar, attempting to capture its essence with words and concepts. But the true nature of the river could only be experienced directly, beyond the confines of language and thought. When he returned to the master, his face bore the quiet contentment of someone who had glimpsed a deeper truth. The master looked at him and asked, "What have you learned?" The philosopher bowed and replied, "I have learned that knowledge from books is like trying to trap the wind. True understanding comes from experience." The Zen master smiled. "Indeed, the most important things in life cannot be found in books. They must be lived, felt, and experienced." When the philosopher returned to his home, he stood in his study, gazing at the rows of books that had once been his pride and joy. He realized that they had become a barrier, not a bridge, to his enlightenment. While they had helped him on his journey, they could take him no further. He no longer needed them. In a symbolic gesture of liberation, the philosopher carried his books out into the yard. With a sense of finality, he set them ablaze, watching as the flames consumed the pages. Smoke curled into the sky, and with it, the remnants of his intellectual attachments were carried away. As the last of the books turned to ash, a weight lifted from his heart. He was no longer bound by the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. He had touched the essence of life itself, and in doing so, found the peace he had sought for so long. News of the philosopher's actions spread quickly through the village. People were shocked, confused, and curious. Some said he had gone mad. Others believed he had reached the pinnacle of wisdom. One villager remarked, "The most important things in life you can't learn through books. You have to learn them through experience." Another added, "Life's most important lessons must be learned for oneself, not from what others have said." Yet another mused, "It's your own thoughts that matter most. Everything else is just indoctrination from others." A young man, inspired by the philosopher's decision, reflected, "Once you've truly understood something, the knowledge stays with you forever. You don't need to keep studying it." Others pondered the act itself. Did he burn the books because he realized their uselessness? Or did he burn them because there was no more knowledge left to gain? I think he burned them because it was time to move on and learn from life itself. Each interpretation revealed more about the individuals than the philosopher himself. In truth, the act was personal, a shedding of the old to embrace the new. Having burned his books, the philosopher withdrew from public life. He no longer sought validation from others, nor did he seek to prove his knowledge. Instead, he lived simply, tending to his garden, meditating by the river, and enjoying the quiet moments of everyday life. People from the village would occasionally visit, hoping to hear his wisdom, but the philosopher rarely spoke. He had learned that true wisdom cannot be given, only experienced. When asked for advice, he would smile and point to the river, suggesting that they sit and watch the water flow, just as he had done. His presence became his teaching, a living example of the peace that comes from letting go of intellectual striving and embracing the present moment. The moral of the story is that the most profound truths in life cannot be found in books or learned from others. They must be experienced directly. While knowledge can guide us, it is only through personal experience and inner reflection that we can truly understand the nature of life and find peace. True enlightenment is not something to be achieved through study, but something that emerges when we let go of our need for external validation and realize the wisdom within ourselves.